and welcome to Our People, the podcast where we give space for Holdeman Stories. We focus on hope, healing, and inspiration. Connection, consciousness, and love are the driving motivations for this project. Remember to have grace for those who have chosen to speak out and share their experience. Please enjoy the story you will hear today.
Welcome to Our People's podcast. I am Amanda, your host. Today I'm joined by Waylon, my co-host. He's going to be speaking about spiral dynamics. So, Waylon, take it away.
Okay, to start with, spiral dynamics is basically a model for explaining psychological development. There are quite a few different models, but in the studying that I've done, I think spiral dynamics does a really good job of explaining the models in a religious or from a religious standpoint. I found it very helpful in my journey to understand why spiral dynamics helped me understand why people tended to react the way they do. One of the most important things when you're studying spiral dynamics is to remember that no level is better or worse than another level. They're just simply where you are and where you have to be. It's impossible for you to skip a level. Just to quickly lay it out, the first level is beige, and then we go to purple, red, blue, orange, green, and yellow. And then turquoise is a level that very, very few people have attained. Beige is, I'm not going to really speak about beige because beige is basically like an infant or maybe a very severely disabled person. Beige is operating so low that there's basically no conscious decisions being made. For a baby, they're hungry, they cry, they're dirty, they cry. They're not deciding to cry to be fed. They just simply cry because they're hungry. And that's about as high as beige goes. So, with that being said, you can't jump from beige to orange. You have to move through purple into red, into blue, and so on. So it's not wise at all to watch somebody operating at the level they are and try to get them to move, let's say, to the level where you think you are. If you're several levels ahead, they must grow through the level they're in, and they must be the one to break out of that level. No levels are better or worse because each level is just where you have to be until you break out. One way of determining where we are is as we go through, as you study this, as we go through this, if you start to feel quite uncomfortable about the level we're speaking about, it's probably where you're at. Usually, as we speak about levels that are below you, or actually, I don't like saying above and below because spiral dynamics tends to be like beige would be a small spiral and bigger and bigger and bigger, and each spiral actually contains the spiral within it. So they're just basically a smaller spiral.
As you spiral up.
Yes, spiral
Yeah.
up and out in a sense, because as you move, you want to take the good parts of the spiral you're leaving and include them. And so that spiral still remains within your spiral. Early stages would be terrified of someone like a Satanist. They are much more, I want to say mystical. That's not exactly the word I'm looking for. Magical. And someone like a Satanist would be seen as probably conspiring with Satan. later stages can see that a Satanist is possibly just it may just symbolize trying to see things from the other side. Um, they may realize that a Satanist is not, is not actually an evil person that's trying to do evil, but just wants to view things, like I said, from the other side, view maybe even the Bible as being an opposite story in a sense. Like what if the Bible was written by the villain and portrayed the good guy as the bad guy? That's somewhat what a Satanist may be interested in. So later spirals see this as just a way of thinking, not as an evil person that wants to conspire with the devil. Each stage tends to flip from ego to tribal. When we're in beige, we're completely self-centered, obviously without trying to be. It's just simply the way it is. Then as you move into
A child,
an infant, actually.
Yes.
They're completely self-centered. You move into the next spiral, they become tribal. The next one is egocentric, tribal, and it's interesting. They work that way all the way up. Each one is a flip. Purple is very tribal. Like I said, beige is egocentric or completely self-absorbed. Purple is tribal. Red is once again focused on the individual. Blue focuses on the group again, but it's a much bigger group. It could be as large as my nation, whereas purple focused on my tribe, maybe 100 people. Overall, the spiral is a journey of just letting go of ego. Each spiral, to move through each spiral, takes letting go of more of your ego. Moving up in a spiral happens when we start bumping up against the limitations of that spiral, of that current stage. Many things can bring that about, that bumping up against limitations. When it happens, we need to include the good things of that spiral and start dropping off the bad things of it so that we can move up into the next spiral. Okay. I'm going to start with purple.
Okay.
So purple is called tribal. If we would assume an old Earth explanation of this planet and of the people, we would probably see that the purple part of the spiral started emerging about 50,000 years ago, 40 to 50,000. And it was probably the main color until about 10,000 years ago. Purple is very fearful of the unknown. It finds that much of its world is unknown. It will usually assign spirits or gods to help fill the gaps in its knowledge, and it will end up believing that most of the world is controlled by spirits or gods. Demons and magic are very real and very feared. Purple fears other tribes a lot too. That's where you see the purple just being very centered in its own tribe. It fears other tribes. It fears people it doesn't understand very much. In fact, as you move further up into blue, they still fear some of the same things of purple. They fear people that are not like them, but someone like a blue would fear, say, someone of a different race. And the more different they are, the more they're feared. But blue would probably accept most people who look like them. Purple accepts just their tribe. Even if other tribes look like them, they will still not accept them. Purple has a difficulty differentiating between concepts and things, objects. If they look at something like a picture of a tree god, they will be hardly be able to differentiate between the tree and the concept of a tree god. To them, those two things just have to go together. Um, Rationality doesn't really exist for purple. They are just deeply spiritual, and that frame of mind comes about from ignorance. They don't understand the world at all. Okay, so what purple would look like in religion today? God is viewed with a massive amount of fear. Hell is viewed with even more fear. Um, this would mean that they may be motivated by God to do what they believe is right, but a greater motivator is hell. Um, for them, hell is seen as a literal, conscious, eternal torment filled with actual demons. Purple believes that heaven is going to be populated by people exactly like themselves. Um, Christians who identify with the purple stage take things very literally. They would fear the number 666, mark of the beast. They would think that those things were literally a danger to them. They could believe that doing something like participating in Reiki would allow a demon to enter them. Purple has difficulty understanding that other religions or races are worth as much as they are. Clan warfare is common, was common back when purple was prevalent, and in religion, an equivalent warfare is also common. Purples are very invested in sacrifice. They would believe that the practice of prosperity gospel um, is something that really works, and they would become quite invested in something like that.
Okay, so then I'm going to be the one to ask the questions about
Yep.
some of this stuff. And so, really, isn't that most religions?
Well, okay, so
Okay, no, I'm sorry. So let me say that better. Isn't that like when we think of Pentecostal and Methodist and Mennonite and Joel Osteen's church, they're big on the whole prosperity gospel and stuff like that. So that's what I'm saying. Isn't this those mainstream religions, aren't they falling into this purple? And probably the leaders most likely wanting to keep their followers in that purple mindset because that is a way then to be led, guided, persuaded, all those things.
yeah, and what you'll see is something may be called purple, but it still may be present as you continue to move up. Um, just because I say it is purple doesn't mean you'll never see parts of it in another color. That is what's interesting is
Right, yes.
you will see as you think of a particular religion, you will see, like we talk about purple and you go, oh wow, I see this and this all stands out to me. And then you'll move into red and you'll say, oh yeah, these things stand out to me in this religion. And then you move into blue and you say, oh wow, they have these things. And so you can't necessarily just say this religion is strictly purple or strictly blue. Um, Something like the prosperity gospel does confuse me a little bit because it does seem quite prevalent. And religions overall, at least in the United States, are pretty blue. You'll see aspects, of course, that are other.
Okay. Okay. Well,
So
I do like that.
when you ascend, go ahead.
Okay. I do like that, that it is said, and you touched on this earlier, that like, as you go, okay, let's say a baby starts out of beige, right? And then they go from
Hmm.
beige and they have purple. They're still beige, but they have purple. And then they go more into the purple. And then they have some red, but they're still purple. And then they go into the red. And then as we evolve and grow, we don't just hop from one color to the next, to the next, to the next. We still have basically, what came before and what's coming next at some point, all kind of mixed in there together. And so then the higher up we go, we still, so I do like that. And like you said, that there's nobody's better or less than. It's
Yeah.
literally the stages of development.
Yep. Yeah. And so as you transcend and include, it is possible to include some of the bad parts. Some of those things can be drug along as well. However, the way I've heard it explained is that, okay, so to move from purple into red, may need to drop off 60% of purple. So you're 40% purple, 60% red. But then to move into blue, you may need to drop off 75% of red. So each stage kind of demands dropping more and more of previous stages. So the lower
Oh,
stages
very good.
can include quite a bit of the previous stage.
Okay.
But then getting clear up into like green and yellow, you have to be very, very green to be considered green. You can't be
Gotcha.
dragging along a lot of the last several stages.
Okay. Very good.
Um, yeah, I was going to respond to something you'd said right at the first. I can't remember what it was. Oh, I think I already did. I talked about moving up and including some of the bad parts as well. Okay. So likely less than 10% of the people on this planet are higher than 50% purple. Purple is pretty much behind us. Um, One interesting fact is that in general, society is ahead of religions. Like the American society in general would be about a step ahead of the religions in America. Um, Religion is often trailing slightly. How you look at your relationships is often a little bit more advanced than the way you view religion. And one reason of this is because religion does always try to hang on to its values that it's believed in for so long. Purple views the Bible as being God's word to the extent that it was likely dictated by God. They believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God. Because of this, purple really cannot coexist with other interpretations in other religions. They cannot see that they may be the ones with a less accurate interpretation. Purple
Oh,
will swear on the Bible as a way to prove their honesty because they believe it will literally hold them accountable and that possibly something bad will happen if they lie after swearing on the Bible. Any lack of respect for the Bible, including a physical copy of the Bible and not just the words of the Bible, is viewed as being sinful or an awful thing to do and could bring about an instant punishment. God is viewed in purple as being very distant. He's extremely feared and viewed as the one pulling the strings, almost like a puppet master. He is to be pleased at all costs. God needs to be appeased and will punish bad and reward good in a very literal way. God is always masculine and contains no femininity. Churches following this God are rooted in fear. Existence for purple is full of fear. Moral failures bring fear of an instant and possibly fatal punishment. God is holy and set apart. A purple cannot even be close to God because they are so much less holy than he is. Poverty and sickness is often viewed as a result of not being close enough to God. Moving on to Jesus. Jesus is seen as a person with the last name of Christ. His main purpose is to save the group from harm, and most often harm coming from God. Penal substitution is a very purple idea. Jesus is not seen as having been fully human. His divinity is always elevated over his humanity. So they view Jesus kind of as a second part of God. Prayer is talking with Jesus or God. Prayer's main use is to confess a sin, to ask forgiveness, or to request a favor. Prayer is confession, repentance, and asking for things. Typically, prayers must include in Jesus' name for the prayer to work. This is not a nod towards praying in his name, but rather like an incantation to bring the request to life. Some rather bizarre notions come from purple. They would appear to think that God may need persuading to heal someone or to alter a situation for a better outcome. It seems that they may see themselves as having more mercy than God if he were not prayed to about a specific situation. Prayer is almost always an attempt to persuade God. Prayer before meals likely stemmed from purple, from the danger of getting sick from insufficient food storage. At that point in time, people had no concept of bacteria and so on. And because of this lack of knowledge, they likely resorted to asking a god to keep them from getting sick and dying, because they probably noted eating things like pork or other things cause death more often than some other foods. And so because they didn't understand why or how this was happening, or understand food storage, or have the capacity, the ability to store food properly, they probably resorted to basically begging God or a spirit or whatever to keep them safe from what they were eating. Moving on to sin and salvation. Sin is seen as,
I guess that's
what's
one
that?
diet plan, right?
Yeah. I mean, you think about all of the just the legislation and the laws we have in place to keep our food supply safe. They have to store things at a certain temperature. They have to do all these cleanliness things to make sure that our food is as safe as possible. And back then, they didn't have anything. Every meal had a decent possibility to kill you. I mean, not a 50%, because that means in a couple meals you would die, but
Oh my God.
meals were dangerous. I mean, eating was dangerous.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I think you were going on into red.
Well, I was moving into sin.
Oh, okay.
Sin is seen as anything that breaks God's commandments. Anything done wrong is a sin. Stage purple sees God's mood swinging with the actions of the individual. If you do something bad, God becomes angry. If you do good, he becomes happy. Natural actions are approved of or disapproved by this spiritual being. Typically, stage purple sees God, it's displeased at everybody or nearly everyone. Okay, sorry. Let me say that again. Typically, stage purple sees God displeased at everyone or nearly everyone. This is until Jesus takes this displeasure on himself. This once again means that Jesus is saving a purple person from God. Something to remember here is, again, that these explanations may have aspects that show up in other stages. So just because part of something sounds like you doesn't mean it's not part of another color where you actually fit much better. Heaven and hell. Hell is a literal home to demons. Hell, demons, and Satan are all bad and literal. So hell must be created by Satan, and it must be his place of dwelling. It's a place of fire, pain, and suffering. It's a place of eternal punishment. It is to be feared, more feared than God. Hell is basically a threatening stick. So if you're not afraid enough of God, then hell is the extra fear you need to correct your behavior. Heaven is the exact opposite. It's filled with happiness and bliss. It is filled with people just like me, or my tribe, or my church. Other faiths and likely other denominations probably won't be in heaven if you're a purple. Everyone is sent to either one of these places, heaven or hell. Anyone who has crossed whatever arbitrary line that a purple has created to judge people will go to hell in their mind. Those on their side of the line will be in heaven. This idea is common to several of the stages, but the main difference is how and where the line is drawn. Purple will draw the line in a fairly tight circle around themselves, whereas some of the later stages may have the line much more distant. The latest stage may even have the line drawn around the whole of humanity. Something like the sun going down and rising are seen as mystical by purple. It is. This is my opinion, but I wonder if possibly flat earthers are purples who are trying to fit into a more rational world without embracing rationalism. Purple would do things like believe that a bit of bread at communion is actually a bit of Jesus' body. So, like the Catholic belief that once you put the wafer in your mouth, it literally becomes Jesus' body is a very purple concept. Crosses are seen to hold special powers because they are shaped like the pieces of wood that Jesus died on, and they would see them as actually holding a power, probably where the idea of using crosses against vampires and other demons came from. So the pros of purple. The highest goal of purple is to protect yourself from demonic influence and the devil. However, there can still be spiritual encounters at this level. Because of their connection to the spiritual, they can have deeply spiritual experiences. Their worldview tends to make almost everything a spiritual encounter. Purples are very open to spiritual encounters with God. They often have deep family bonds. And as we transcend, we should try to include these positive attributes as long as they are healthy, such as healthy family bonds. Purples are loyal and stable. They value leadership. Later stages can almost demonize leadership. So that is another attribute that it would be wise to try to bring along. They have a great understanding of belonging. Once again, later stages tend to be more individual, so bringing along the belonging can be quite positive. The cons of purple. This stage experiences heavy indoctrination. They are easily manipulated. Physical abuse can be quite common in purple. They would use very physical child training methods, things like beatings and other painful methods of child training. Violence is present because of fear, misunderstanding, and lack of explanation of the world around them. They are fiercely committed to their leader, especially if they think the leader is chosen by God. And because of that, they may remain silent about abuse within their tribe or committed by the leader. Self-centered behavior is also quite common. This sounds like it shouldn't be that way because they are very tribal, but the reason they are so tribal is because they are very committed to their own survival, and they see the tribe as the method to survive. So if you find yourself trying to work with a person at purple, remember they can only grow to red. If we are higher, if we're orange or green, we just simply cannot move them to the level we're at. They have to move into red. And that is about all I have for purple. It's highly unlikely to meet very many purple. I think that he said less than 10% of the world is purple, and most of that would be probably some of the less the people who are less have been in a lot less contact with the civilized world. Red. Okay, red is often called the warrior stage. It is egocentric and seems very much like selfish tribalism. Realistically, about 20% of the planet is at stage red. Much of Africa and possibly some of the Middle East is probably stage red. Most of us in North America likely didn't grow through a culture stage red, but we very likely had a personal stage red as well as a religious stage red. Generally speaking, red came onto the world stage about 10,000 years ago. A phrase that sums up red very well is might is right. If you are strong, healthy, powerful, or victorious, you believe yourself to be right. Red in a small child tends to look like the terrible twos. It uses screaming, aggression, and force to get what it wants and get its needs met. It starts coming out of purple and realizing it has its own wants and needs, and that it can require things separately from the rest of the family or group. Red needs control and is often aggressive. Many hate groups are strongly red. Red starts to understand its own life and its role in life more than purple did. It still feels quite mystical, but that power is starting to slip for red. They will often recognize someone in authority, but only a very few authorities. Reds in authority do not play well with others. Parents who yell, "because I say so," are usually coming from a quite red place. Reds see the world very black and white. Grays really don't exist for them. Reds often feel little guilt. They believe their religion is correct and that their thinking is correct, mostly because they believe that the God they're following is correct. During the Inquisition and the conquering of the New World, the Spanish murdered thousands of people and felt little or no guilt because they believed they were following the correct word of the correct God. They would feel that people against them are ungodly and wrong. and they believe that they're ungodly and wrong because these people are in opposition to them to themselves, who are obviously guided by the right God. If I remember right, um, after the Spanish started conquering the New World, people started having a problem with the tremendous murder. Um, and so they got the Pope to say that they needed to they needed to murder if people didn't accept Jesus, accept their God. So to follow the Pope's rules, they started basically coming into a native New World encampment or group of people, and they would pull out a scroll and read, "You must accept God. You have 10 minutes to accept God, and after that, we will consider you as heathen and kill you." Well, of course, the people didn't understand Spanish. They had no idea what was being said, but they did not feel any guilt anymore because they
Sure.
believed they were doing what was right, because they needed to spread God, and these people were not accepting God. Um,
Oh, wow. So basically just genocide,
yes.
all in the name of, but these people didn't even understand their language.
No. It Someone, actually, it was Columbus that wrote that he watched people throwing babies into the river with the same enthusiasm that he imagined they would throw demons into the lake of fire.
Oh my word.
Okay, just someone trying to have a rational or logical conversation with red to the red, will indicate that the person is demonic, evil, or ungodly, because God is not to be questioned. So if your conversation, your logical conversation is talking about God, that is very dangerous to a red. They cannot stand someone questioning their God. God is not to be questioned. This is extremely black and white thinking. The only person red stage are afraid of is their God. They will fear other tribes, but as individuals, they fear God more than any other individual. They will often judge everyone and classify them as good or demonic based on only their feelings and understanding. The fear of God is often used as a weapon against other people. The red stage respects a leader taking control by force. Although it is forceful, red is communicating their needs more than stage purple. Young children's bullying is very red. Rebellious youth are often exhibiting a lot of red behavior. The Vikings killing, raping, and plundering was very red. They seem to not recognize that they were taking another person's freedom or possessions simply because they wanted those things for themselves, and that took away that feeling of encroaching or taking other people's things. Criminals, street gangs, mob bosses are very red. Prisons are filled with red stage people. This often ends up that many people who work at reaching out in prison ministries are blue, because red needs to transcend to blue. People in orange and green often have a hard time reaching someone who is quite red. The frontier mentality, as well as the occupation of North America, are both great examples of red behavior. Oh, here I wrote about that a little bit. The document the Pope issued commanding Christians to spread Christianity to all their little lands was all the permission they needed to steal, kill, and plunder through any country they came across. This was viewed as permission from God, and being red, they treated it as something that was not only allowed but commanded. Christopher Columbus has writings describing these men throwing native babies into the water with the same fervency as they were throwing devils into the lake of fire. Someone who is orange should look at selfishness in themselves to dig out the remaining bits of red. Red ends up caring very little for community. Crusades are a great example of red Christianity. Fundamental religions are quite red as well. Substitutionary atonement is a red idea. It exists in purple, but it's still very present in red. The Bible once again contains the literal word of God. There is no room for error and is very clear-cut. The bodily of resurrection of Jesus is contained in red, whereas later stages may believe the story is supernatural or have some other explanation. Red will blow up in anger at anyone challenging or disputing their positions or beliefs. They will validate their position with Scripture. They still hold the belief that life for an eye, instead of Jesus' teaching of eye for an eye, they see their own life as worth far more than others' lives. Red holds a concept of godly versus ungodly nations. People who are knee-jerk pro-nation, such as pro-Israel, are probably holding red ideas. Okay, how red sees the Bible. It is without error and to be taken literally. It is scientifically and historically accurate. They believe it was penned by God to perfection without any errors or mistakes, and it contains everything God needs us to know. Purple and blue can both hold these ideas, so it takes some discernment to tell where you're at between between red and blue. Most King James versions only groups are very red. They feel that reading any other translation makes the person or group wrong. Red seems unable to process that possibly each translation has its own issues in which they each differ from the original. They will respond with righteous anger to any challenge. They will respond with righteous anger to any challenge to their understanding of the Bible. They do not see it as their understanding of the Bible, and instead they feel that it's just simply the facts and the truth. Followers in red are attracted to wrathful passages in the Bible. They also love the end times.
Wait, they're attracted to what?
Wrathful. They love God's wrath.
Oh, wrath. Oh, wait, okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
And the end times, they would enjoy reading about how God is going to punish everyone different than them. Okay. Doctrinal purity is very important to them. Active opposition to differing doctrines is very common. One thing to be aware of is that people who are moving into blue can still have strong red tendencies. Just because you see one thing in yourself doesn't mean you are completely at that stage. Lastly, the Bible is ultimately a story of the battle between good and evil. Now, how red sees God. God resides in heaven and visits earth to right wrongs. He is viewed as distant and far off and comes in wrath and violence. He's seen as a warrior, and compassion he may have is through the lens of being a king or a warrior. God is love is not something a red can really agree with. If they say God is love, they must follow it up with he is also just or also wrathful. They can't recognize a God that isn't aggressive. The violence of the Old Testament is embraced by red. They enjoy reading those passages on Sunday mornings. They seem to believe God hates people who are different. In their minds, this idea is upheld by the genocides and killings in the Bible. They also feel that if you were to read your Bible, you'd understand it like they do. They believe their hurtful and awful behavior is love. The pain they inflict in an attempt to make you see things there, and by extension, God's way, is obviously love in their minds. I think I don't want to point too much, but I think we've all probably experienced a bit of that hurtful love.
Yep. I'm doing this for your own good.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I make you aware of your errant ways, you will come back to the right way.
Right. Or any any pain I cause, if it keeps you from going to hell, is loving.
Right. Yep.
Okay, Red sees Jesus as being a bit weak and ineffective, unless they're viewing him in his coming in judgment persona. Their ideal language for Jesus is strong war language. Restrained, meek, and suffering Jesus is not comfortable in the Red worldview. However, there is still a certain level of personal relationship with Red. This relationship would look formal and legal instead of intimate. This connection is very rule based. Even though Jesus is a tool to avoid hellfire and damnation, Reds still enjoy talking about these subjects when discussing Jesus. San Francisco having an earthquake because of the gays is a very Red idea. They seem to ignore that London has many gay people as well, but virtually no earthquakes. They tend to see bad things happening as punishment. This is quite a Sodom and Gomorrah type attitude. Prayer and worship. Red often sees prayer as a way to call discipline on their enemies. Prayer language is very spiritual warfare language. A lot of intercessory prayer is or can look quite Red as well. They will pray for other groups to be rehabilitated, but if the group seems beyond help, they may pray for their downfall, or that they be destroyed. Prayer against suffering, sickness, and other human problems is done as if it were a prayer against a demon. Everything is seen as spiritual warfare once again. Much of Red's religious music is warlike and full of warfare language. Songs with phrases like "the banner going before" and "the armor of God" are both strongly Red imaging. Demonizing everything in this stage is also a bit Red, so be careful not to get bogged down in judging and demonizing these traits. Songs about being rewarded for our good works are common. Once again, life for Red revolves around spiritual battle. Red moving into blue is starting to recognize generational curses.
Okay.
This,
Wait. So red going into blue is starting to realize generational curses.
yes. So the
Well,
spiritual
I'll
battle part, I think the spiritual battle part of these curses is Red, but then the shifting of blame to something other than the devil or yourself is the part that's moving into blue.
um to back up and talk about the prayer, um in the red prayer that you were talking about. Um, so there was this Mennonite man, his wife was, I believe, in the process of leaving him, and I think he knew that. But anyways,
Mm-hmm.
she went to a party. So obviously, she'd already left the church, I think, but she went out to a party, and I guess he prayed, and he just had the urge to pray for her that she would not make it to where she was going, something like that. Anyways, the lady ends up having a wreck on the way to this party, so does not make it, but like messes, like it wasn't a good wreck either. It was pretty
Mm-hmm.
serious. And when my in-laws, told us that story, we were like, oh, like, um, what, how was that any different than spell casting? You literally got on your knees and
Mm-hmm.
prayed for her, but she wouldn't get to where she was going. She doesn't get there, and you stand up and say, "Praise the Lord." That was the Lord's work in progress. Oh, okay, okay. I'm gonna step back from this one.
Yeah. Yeah. After I left the church, I was told by someone that they didn't want it to go this far, but they were going to start praying that anything it took to bring me back would happen. And I think at that point we were talking about my kids. And so I took that I I didn't take that very well.
Good. Neither should you. That is terrible, and I do not understand. Which I mean, I guess that's because that's where they're at. That is where they're at
Yeah.
in their development, and it's my way. It's I live the right way. You need to be here with me, and if you're not, then I'm going to pray for your soul that anything that it takes can get you to where you need to be right here beside me,
Yep. Yep.
whether religiously or the spouse relationship, whatever.
I remember actually, I remember that in when I was in the church. I remember hearing a terrible story. I think someone's brother or maybe one of their children died, and then they returned to the church. And I remember people saying, "Well, that's just what it took," and that happened so that they would come back, and that made it okay. That made it acceptable or livable, or I mean, that was what they used to actually comfort themselves and say, well, I guess there was a reason that they were killed.
Yep, there's a young man that um fled. It was this whole thing. Anyways, that got into some road rage, I do believe. But I mean, okay, like a road rage battle, and he
Mm-hmm.
ended up speeding off. Like whatever happened, anyways, there ended up being they got pretty much gunned down, and his best friend and passenger got killed in that whole shooting. And that
Mm-hmm.
young man came. The passenger has not, they non-Mennonite, nothing to do ever with Mennonites. But
Right.
the driver had been Mennonite, was ex-Mennonite. He came back to the church, and that's, yeah, everybody just praised, well, oh, the good that came out of that. And I thought, somebody lost their
Yep.
life over this. Like,
Yep.
I don't think this works.
Yeah, I've heard other things such as, well, if it took them being paralyzed, or yeah, it gets pretty it gets pretty disturbing in my opinion. Okay. Um Still in red here. Moving into sin and salvation. Sin is breaking God's rules. It's still very simplistic, black and white view of what sin is. Doing something God told you to not do or something he doesn't want you to do is a sin. He gets very upset and offended by your sins. There is often a lot of focus on sexual purity. Sex is often viewed, sex is often the most focused on sin at stage red. Violence and murder can be validated by stage red, so sex ends up at the forefront of sins. Violent atonement theory is important to red.
And then they wonder why all these people have issues with porn and everything else. Well, maybe if you wouldn't make it so, you know, discombobulated, it might actually help. If there was a
Yeah,
healthy way to deal with sexuality, and a child coming into their sexuality, which is a healthy, normal development, and not demonizing sexuality, that might help tremendously.
Right. I mean, I want to have a whole talk on this, a whole, I don't know, round table but it just amazes me at how someone like Red can tell young people that sex is the most awful, the most horrible thing until the night they're married, and then it's their duty to perform. It I don't think the human mind can flip between those two that quickly. I think there's a lot more to that I could say, but I think I want to say that all in its own recording.
Okay.
Okay, heaven and hell. Red sees heaven and hell, very similarly to purple. Believing in Jesus avoids God's wrath and takes you to heaven. God finally gets revenge on all the deserving wicked. The kingdom of heaven is mostly just seen as a place you go when you die. Later stages see the kingdom of heaven as a attitude, basically a way you can live, but Red sees it as the heaven you go to when you die. They do have a little bit of kingdom of heaven on earth. They believe that they can bring a bit of the kingdom of heaven to earth by waging war against sin, fighting things like abortion, the trans agenda, and so on, are seen as bringing the kingdom closer to earth. Churches can become militant and violent when in stage red. For them, only men can lead. They later
But,
on,
but, 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 but there were literally female prophets in the Bible
okay,
time. So how do they explain that one away?
later on, they explain that there are a few women leaders, but those women have to be physically stronger than the men. They had to have taken that leadership through being stronger than the men. That was the only way they could
And that
respect it.
makes sense how? Okay.
Well, because they just see strength as basically being God's blessing on that person and their license to be a leader.
Okay.
Red would often advocate deadly force. Going to war or supporting the death penalty can be a quite a red mentality. Stage red Christians would feel that something like the post 9/11 wars were justified and right. Torturing someone and taking away their rights, destroying their lives, if they're suspected of being a terrorist, would probably be okay to stage red. Okay, mysticism. Like stage purple, red confuses mystical experiences with magic and fantasy. While it's a bit more nuanced than purple, it is still broad in its misunderstanding of mystical and sees almost everything as magical. Stage red would have a hard time believing in miracles, except the miracles that happened in the Bible. They know that the Bible speaks of healings, but they don't see any today. So they tend to think that the Bible has replaced the miracles. Because they have the Bible, they don't need the miracles like healings and so on. Someone like John MacArthur explains miracles by saying that miracles exist, but they are brought about by the devil. They attribute mystical things to spiritual warfare again.
Oh, wow. Maybe that's,
Um,
no, that's not maybe. My mother, she don't listen to this podcast, so I can say this, but she has what I would consider the gift of prophecy because she has dreams, and I mean it is
mhm.
crazy. But she's like, nope, no, want nothing, like I don't want to encourage it or anything like that. She says because, so she'll hardly talk about it because of that. She says because I do not want to basically tempt the devil. I'm like, oh my, okay.
Yeah,
I know I've told that story on before, but still, I mean, it's just always just amazing that yes, that is how they think. Or some.
yeah. Okay. Demons are real and they possess people. In That's believed in stage red. Although stage red is starting to move beyond literal demons. Almost everything is filled with a sense of winning or losing to red because they are so egocentric. Okay, pros of red: fervor and passion. They hold beliefs so deeply that they would be willing to die for those beliefs. Later stages tend to hold beliefs a lot more loosely, and they aren't as passionate about those beliefs. Red has a lot of belonging. Later stages can be more lonely, so that's another thing you may want to bring along as you move up, is bring along belonging. The less positive side of belonging in red is that often they belong because they've distanced themselves from all other people and ideas, so they have to belong in their group. Red can communicate well with purple, so tapping into red if talking to a purple person is quite helpful. Connection with God is also something that red is very passionate about. Cons of red: there's strong focus on conflict. They are seldom at peace and need to be at war with something or someone. They feel that only they have the truth, and they are quite motivated by fear. While fear is a strong motivator, it obviously is not a healthy motivator. They Red lacks the discipline that purple had. They tend to feel very my way or the highway. Things that will push red to grow into blue: they often seek the next level when they realize their lifestyle or beliefs are hurting the people around them. Red is really not a very sustainable stage. This is easy to see when we view dictators and the way they're usually toppled by another dictator rising into power. It's not very healthy to stay in stage red for very long. Um, Red leaders usually are only able to control fairly small groups. Red churches that are growing usually have to make a shift towards blue if they want sustainability. Most of us do not have to live through red in our cultural experience. Religiously, we may have dealt with it. Once again, it is important to realize we need to encourage red to move into blue. Higher stages want to move red quickly into higher stages and can forget that they must grow through blue. Pushing someone to move into stages they aren't yet facing will usually cause them to draw back and sink back into the lower parts of their stage. They will often regress if we try to move them too quickly. That is what I have for red.
Okay.
Okay, that's about all I have for red here. Um, I think that it's probably getting long enough that we won't go any more callers right now. probably just talk a little bit about what our thoughts are on these colors so far.
Okay, sounds good to me. All right, so I wanted to read a little bit here about like what is the essence of the red. So their core values would be egocentric, impulsive. Um, their worldview would be much the world is a jungle, survival of the fittest. Life motto, I am taking charge without taking others into account. Life theme, immediate gratification of impulses and senses and fight for my own interests. And then life
Mhm.
philosophy, I only trust myself and what I want now. Now I'm going to read that same thing, but for purple. Um, okay, so the purple would be their core values would be animistic. Is that how you say that? Animistic. The clan, magical.
Okay, yeah.
Um, their worldview would be the world is a mysterious and frightening place and is controlled by mystical spirit beings that need to be satisfied and pleased. Their life motto would be I sacrifice myself for the sake of the clan and the existential reality. Their life theme would be to secure the survival of the family. And life philosophy seek harmony and safety in a mysterious world within the family, clan, and or tribe.
Yeah.
Um, a purple leader, their characteristics would be offer grounding and safety, can connect people and create strong bonds, make sure that the being a part of the organization department really means something, acknowledges and understands traditions and historical value, is able to create strong commitment, and gives people the feeling to work together in a holy mission. That would be a purple leader. And then a red leader,
Mhm.
I'm sure, is very much more dictative leadership. Daring to make decisions on his own and is independent. Acts um, autonomously, makes decisions and choices and dares to be very direct. Urgency, sets and keeps the pace. Executive power, alert. Accountable, confrontational, says how it is, also addresses issues that may decrease popularity. And shows power does not only think but acts as well.
And that's which color?
Red.
Red. Okay. Yeah.
So,
Some something interesting that can happen in leadership is that a leader can actually be several levels up,
okay. And
but speak to people in lower levels.
why is that?
Well, this could be really controversial, but it's one of the examples that one of the people I was studying brought out. He brought out Jordan Peterson, and he said Jordan Peterson is quite high level, but
Um,
he tends to speak to people in blue. And the issue he had with it is he said he feels that his method of speaking to blue actually holds them in blue. So he is several stages up, but like in his case, it's in his financial best interest to maintain his following. And so he actually does a really good job of speaking to blue.
That's what I think about that. Joel Osteen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's likely quite a bit higher because he knows how to handle all these people. And if he were truly a
Yep.
lower stage, he wouldn't know how to handle people that well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, as much as one hates to say this, you know, I think the leaders that want to see their people thrive and, up alongside them probably are very few and far between.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. They tend to hold him back a little bit. Something interesting. It's in blue, but I'm just going to quote it here. Something interesting. They did a poll on leadership of blue churches, and they asked how many of them, what percentage of them, believed in literal heaven and literal hell, and it was 100%. Then they polled the congregations and asked about literal heaven, and it was 84% of the congregations believed in a literal heaven. Then in literal hell, it was, I think he said about 72% believed in literal hell. So those leaders, every one professed a belief in literal heaven and hell, but their congregations were willing to not. I think that's part of what we're talking about is I think the leaders probably don't actually hold those beliefs at all, but 100% of them said they did to hold their congregations as much as possible into that place, into that mindset. It's my opinion that most of those leaders, if they believed in literal heaven and hell, could never do the things they're doing, run the churches that they're running.
Run them the way they're running.
Yeah.
So just for curiosity's sake, I'm going to read the blue leadership characteristics.
Okay.
Create order and security. Be clear about within which boundaries people can act and what people can expect. Gives transparency about choices that are being made. Dedicated. Be responsible and meticulous. Give the correct example. As long as I guess nobody else can see and
Yeah.
out and open, maybe. Capture the plotted lines in a clear and organized schedule with an overview of time, paths, next steps, milestones, um, and evaluation moments. Show perseverance in financial activities. Trustworthy and predictable and be respectable and stable. Address people, be conscious, be committed, check and double check, and link consequences to agreements made. So I'm going to just keep going out of
Wow.
curiosity. I'm going to
Blue leadership actually sounds fairly advanced. Hmm. That's really interesting. One of the things with that is I don't think that once you get into like greens and yellows, I'm not sure about orange, but greens and yellows, you don't really have people who are interested in being leaders anymore. Especially of like a large, like a mega church or something. Actually, green might
so
still
you're
be,
so,
but
I was going to say, okay. Orange leaderships are manages result orientated, keep goals clear, and is good at strategic maneuvering, drives to show entrepreneurship and to be successful, takes up challenges, recognizes and uses chances, has a good antenna for trends and developments, is flexible to adjust to reality, searches for possibilities to be successful, infectious zest and presents oneself in a well-groomed professional manner, stimulates individual intuitive initiatives, challenges people to explore their possibilities further and values and rewards and success, capable to present yourself, the department, or organization in a concrete way and with flair.
So something interesting or something I think to keep in mind is talking about these leaderships. That I think they're describing leadership of companies, of any organization. And I think that you will see that religious leadership are trailing quite far behind.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that's the leadership they're talking about here.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, green leadership, okay, gives attention to everyone and gives everyone the space to be heard, stimulate people to become their real self, accept every person completely in their own individuality, be process orientated. It's about the process, not about the result. Involve people in decisions and initiatives, create support for important changes, give people their own responsibility. This is definitely about business. Create an
Yeah.
open atmosphere, also create space for save vulnerability, guard the human dimension, good listener, authentic as a human with emotions, make things personal and be involved in it. Well, I can't stop there. Now I need to know. I got to go to yellow. Give me a second. Okay, yellow leadership skills are ensure a clear vision and purpose direct objectives, be an inspiring beacon for your people, show that you have an overview and an understanding of how everything is connected and works together, makes choices from a large context, focus attention and message towards the overachieving purpose of the system, able to make complex things simple and to communicate them in an understandable language, able to distinguish between the essential and the ancillary, be critical in a healthy way, creative, sharp, and open-minded. Okay, the turquoise leader that you, how many did you say ever reach the turquoise?
I think less than 1%.
Okay, so this is less than 1% of many. To be able to translate complexity from a universal coherence into simple, pragmatic elements on an individual, group, nation, or global level. To be able to tune in energetic, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and physical aspects of life and work. To have the ability to have the other see and experience his or her unique place in the bigger whole, be compassionate and at the same time transect clearly what needs to be done.
Yeah, a turquoise is so high up that they're basically almost operating in a different level. Like they're able to look at something, understand all the complexities, and yet able to explain it simply. They're very, yeah, they're very, very advanced.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Um, okay. Anything you wanted to add?
I did want to say that again about religions normally trailing society or the culture. And then as we were talking a little bit, I think that you can definitely have different aspects within yourself. Like you may be once we get to orange, you'll understand how basically orange is the heart of capitalism. It's very capitalistic, and orange would push very hard to start a business, run a business, exceed, excel. And I think that we can see someone maybe being orange in their business and maybe blue in their cultural lives, but red in their religious life. I don't think that someone necessarily is pulls all those things up together. The same way that religion is trailing culture in almost every country you look at. Those people probably are living culturally at a level different than religiously.
And did you mention what we were talking about off camera about uh what normally moves you up? Death.
Oh, yeah, we could. Um, for all levels, the main motivating factor for moving from one spiral to another is great love or great suffering. Um, Many times, something like a divorce, maybe the loss of a career, maybe a death in the family, those things will often motivate somebody to start trying to move up. One of the things that we need to remember if someone else is going through great suffering is that showing them great love is even more motivation for them to move up. But we have to be extremely careful not to be preachy and to push them to move, because if we start trying to push them to move, they are going to lock down and for sure stay where they're at. I actually have a couple notes on that I think would be fine here. Yeah, someone in, we haven't got to blue yet, but someone in stage blue, to show them unconditional love completely blows their mind. They cannot they can't even accept it. They don't understand it. They can't accept it, but it will often encourage them to think and to start trying to understand what did that mean and where did that come from, and that is the encouragement that can help them to move up.
Very good.
Um, Anyone born during or before the mid 1990s were probably born into stage blue culturally. Then those born after that were probably culturally born into stage orange. One thing to remember is that it isn't actually uncommon for someone born into stage blue to die in stage blue. So it's really up to you to seek that growth if you want to move up and make a difference, make a change, become more advanced. Um, I think unless you have any more thoughts or questions, I think
Nope, I think that's great.
yeah, so we'll probably end there and do blue sometime pretty shortly in the future here.
Okay. That sounds great to
So,
me. I appreciate it. I find this so fascinating. You're the one that actually brought this spiral dynamics to my attention. Oh, what, 2 years ago? Something like that.
mhm.
And oh, fascinating. Uh, Phil Drysdale, right?
Yeah.
That's the one. And I went through them and listened to it. And then when my sister was at a stage where she was, lear- read ready to hear, listen, whatever, was searching for some things. Um, I passed it on to her and she found it helpful and fascinating. And so, yeah, they're really neat to dive into and to listen to and to gauge and see yourself where and like you said, in the spirals, purple, red, on at the bottom, and then going on up to where you are, and then when you come to the one that you're like, ooh, I don't like that one. I
There
like
is something to say with that. Orange is normally where people start accepting all of this and listening to it. Stage blue will have a hard time actually listening through all of this.
Okay, very good.
They don't necessarily see a reason to move up. Usually a little bit higher than that, you start seeing that, oh, moving up is positive for me. It helps my relationships. It helps the way I feel about myself. So if it's really hard to get through, you're probably stage blue, but it's a great thing to try to do, to try to listen through it. With what Amanda said, I do want to give credit to that Phil Drysdale. He was a pastor, and he now works with deconstructing Christians. I believe he is still a Christian, but he works with people who have stumbled into that place where you lose your faith and you don't know what to do. And he actually has a website for people who are struggling and who feel alone. Um, he runs a Discord as well that you can join, and he's very active on there. Anyway, um, I think all of the callers, I think he did 16 hours on all the callers. This is quite cut down from what he did.
Mhm.
And he spent, I think he said 30 to 40 hours study on each caller for himself. So there is a lot of there is a lot of information condensed down here. So,
Yep. But it's a good start, good overview. If you're interested in it, go look it up, go read more about it. If it doesn't call to you, move on. It's perfectly fine. You're just not there yet, or may never be there. You're not interested in it. It's okay. Whatever calls to you is the way you go, which is the beauty of life, of
yep.
individuality, of who we are. So awesome. Well, thank you, Waylon, for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank
You have a
you.
good, have a good day.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. It is an honor to connect with our guests, and we wish the best for them as well as our listeners. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. Our People can be found on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. If you are interested in sharing your story, please contact us at ourpeoplepodcastteam@gmail.com. Thank you.